I'm just going to give a little bit more time. Deb is here. Hi, Deb. I'm going to just admit more people in here and then just kind of get rid of my participation. 40 participants. We got the chat going. So in the chat, we have a handout you're going to want to grab. And also in the chat, we have a link for a credits. So a form that you might want to sign for completion. Okay. So I'm just going to wait one more minute here. All right, and go to full screen and we'll get started. All right. All right. Well, okay. It's 6 o'clock. My name is Jeannie Shop. I'm the president of the Reading League Wisconsin, and I have my friend and colleague, Mary Newton, here with me, my trusted co-pilot who will be in charge of the chat if you have any questions, and bring participants in. And I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce Dr. Stephanie Stollar to all of you. So she is the founder of Stephanie Stollar Consulting, LLC, the creator of the Science of Reading Academy. I'm a member. Deb's a member. It's a great place to learn and grow. So I encourage all of you to join if you're interested in learning and growing on the science of reading. She is also a part-time assistant professor of the online reading science program at Mount St. Joseph University and a founding member of the National Alliance for Supporting Science of Reading in Higher Education. She's also a board member of the Innovation Education Consortium, works collaboratively with MTSS Innovations in Education. Dr. Stollar worked as a school psychologist, an educational consultant, as vice president of professional learning for Acadience Learning. She has provided professional development, conducted research, published in areas of assessment and early intervention, and collaborative problem solving. She is passionate about improving educator knowledge and aligning the school system to prevent reading failure, and that's why we're here tonight. So we are all here to learn and grow about tier 1 instruction is risk reduction. So I'm going to take it away to Stephanie, and Mary, don't forget, hit record. We're all set.
Well, thank you, Jeannie. Thank you to all of the folks at the Reading League Wisconsin for organizing this event and inviting me to present. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the work that you all are doing to bring awareness to issues related to reading and literacy to your state. And I appreciate you offering this, not just to folks in Wisconsin, but to everybody around the country. So thank you again for inviting me to be part of this tonight. I am going to be talking about a topic that I am very passionate about, this idea that we can, in fact, prevent reading failure. I think this is our best opportunity to bring literacy to all students. And it's often misunderstood, I think, in the MTSS model. So this is my goal tonight, to help clarify and perhaps undo some misconceptions. So we're going to talk about the MTSS multi-tiered systems of support model as the framework for implementing the science of reading. This is what's going to prevent us from thinking the science of reading is just about adopting new programs. There's a lot more to it. We are going to prioritize Tier 1 instruction as primary prevention of reading failure. And we're going to talk about the elements of effective Tier 1 instruction. So if you find yourself in a situation where you have lots of students who are at risk, this is the alternative way to go. So I'm going to start with the Reading League's definition of the science of reading from the defining guide that you can access from the Reading League's website. And in case there's anybody here who's not yet a member of the Reading League, this is my plug to encourage you to join. There's no charge to join the Reading League. And you should join your state chapter as well, whether you're in Wisconsin or one of the other states that has a chapter of the Reading League. One of the efforts from the National Reading League has been to get consistency and agreement around what the science of reading is. So they have produced a defining guide that you can download free from the Reading League's website. It contains the definition that you see on your screen. And you can read through this and think about the various elements of this definition. But I want to point your attention to the last section where we talk about effectively assessing and teaching, and therefore improving student outcomes. That's the most important part, through prevention of and intervention for reading difficulties. That, to me, is the part that connects most directly with the multi-tiered systems of support model. And it helps us remember that prevention is not only possible, it is our duty to make sure that every student leaves first grade as a skilled reader. That's the best opportunity. We have the multi-tiered systems of support model as the framework for bridging the gap between what's known in the research and what's actually happening in your school currently. This is the way of contextualizing and bringing the reading research into your school system in a way that it will be sustained and maintained over time. Otherwise, it's just a random set of acts of improvement, and that's not going to get our students where we need them to be. So if I was going to boil down MTSS into its most essential elements for you, I would say these three things. Find out what students need. So we do that through universal screening and diagnostic assessment. Provide what students need first and foremost in Tier 1, regular classroom instruction, and then intensify support for students who need it as you have data that indicates that they need something additional. Here's the image that I use to talk about the multi-tiered system of support model. This is depicted as, for me, a cone. It's a three-dimensional model. The three tiers of instruction are what you're used to seeing in that triangle shape, and we'll talk about those tiers. But at the base of that model is problem solving about your systems and getting barriers out of teachers' way, eliminating the barriers that are standing in the way of them doing that good, effective, high quality instruction that's going to get all students to grade level expectations. So this model is about making sure that at the Tier 1 level, classroom reading instruction, we are using what's known in the reading research, putting that into place in whole group and small group formats for students based on the universal screening data and any diagnostic data that we have. So we're really aligning our first reading instruction at Tier 1 to the needs of the students in front of us at each grade level. This is primary prevention of reading failure. Teaching reading the first time around in a way that's lined up to student needs. Not teaching over their heads, not teaching something that they already know, but matching first instruction to student needs. This is how we shrink risk. This is how we can get to that objective of having the vast majority, 80% or more of our students, meeting those grade level expectations with no intervention, just with that high quality first reading instruction. Then you'll see the second layer of prevention, secondary prevention of reading failure, which is what we call Tier 2. It's an extra dose of the same research aligned small group instruction that we were giving students in Tier 1. Not necessarily a different program. It might be, but not necessarily. And if it is a different program, that Tier 2 intervention is aligned to what we're doing in small groups in Tier 1. And the purpose of Tier 2 is to accelerate growth, to catch students up so that another 15% of students meet those grade level expectations. And those two tiers, Tier 1 and Tier 2, can be planned by grade level teams or building level teams. We don't have to have an individual student meeting to plan those. We're using our universal screening data, our diagnostic assessment data in grade level or building level teams to do that design of that system, those two systems, tier 1 and tier 2. Then tier 3 is our most intensive instructional support. This is the very focused and targeted instruction to an even smaller group of students than we were working with in tier 2, where everybody in the small group has the same instructional need, where we are giving our best high quality instruction, very explicit and systematic, with immediate corrective feedback and lots of opportunity to practice to get students from accuracy to automaticity, where we are monitoring progress most frequently. And if we see a student isn't growing, we're making sure that we're changing instruction. All of those characteristics of tier 3 are what we use to talk about it as being more intensive. In addition, tier 3 is the point in time when we are customizing the instruction to individual student needs. We're convening that individual student problem-solving team where we're inviting parents to be part of that meeting, other family members, community members, all of the people who have a stake in that student's reading outcomes are coming together to be involved in the planning, the evaluation of instruction, and the problem solving to get students on track. So that intensive support is designed to get that last 5% of students caught up to the grade level expectations. So that's a quick rundown of the tiered model. To give you just a little bit of an introduction, what I want to focus on is the tier 1 system and what we can do to use it to the benefit of all students to shrink risk, to get more students on track. So I'm going to be focusing here on this tier 1 system. Here are some of the characteristics of effective tier 1 instruction. And I've mentioned some of these, but I want to highlight some places where people often get confused or sort of make misunderstandings, I guess I would say. First of all, you might have noticed that the outline of this 3-tiered model is green to represent the fact that every student is a tier 1 student. Every student is getting tier 1 instruction. It needs to be customized to meet the needs of all students at the grade level. So everybody accesses tier 1 instruction, even if they need some support to do so, perhaps if they have a disability. The way we need to think about classroom reading instruction is that its job is primary prevention of reading failure. If we're talking about older students, grade 2 and above, we're talking about not letting that reading difficulty get worse over time. Generally, we're thinking about tier 1 as the place where students spend most of their instructional minutes. Most of their reading instruction time is in tier 1. There's nothing set in stone about 90 to 120 minutes. This is just kind of a general parameter, what you might see in most schools. And the decision about how much time you need in tier 1 is based on your screening data. I've seen schools that only have 45 minutes of tier 1 instruction get almost every student to grade level expectations. And I've seen other schools that need 150 minutes of tier 1 instruction. So like all decisions in MTSS, how much time depends on the needs of your students. What you're doing during that time is more important than just having the minutes. You have to have instruction that's lined up with what we know in the research. Take advantage of what we know in the research about what to teach and how to teach it. So have a good, high quality program with lots of good professional development for teachers so that it gets delivered effectively and matched to student needs. Now, one of the things that people often misunderstand about tier 1 instruction, because we say it's for all students, people sometimes misunderstand and think that means everybody gets the same thing in whole group all the time, like for 90 minutes. And that's actually not the case. By design, from the very beginning of first conceptualizing a 3-tiered model, tier 1 was highly differentiated. The first way we teach reading should be lined up to students' skills. This is not tracking. This is not the redbirds, bluebirds, and crows. And if you are in the low group for reading, you're in the low group for everything. And this is not about accommodations either. This is not about taking students back to the skill where they are currently and sort of accommodating and leaving them there. This is about flexible, skill-based small groups that are part of an overall system. So one small group is happening during tier 1, and then more on that at the other tiers in just a minute. Oops, sorry. I mentioned that tier 1 instruction should be planned based on screening data by a grade level team or a building team. And the way to evaluate the effectiveness of your tier 1 instruction is in terms of the percentage of students who are getting to your screening expectations. You should have no more than 20% at every grade level who are at risk if your tier 1 is doing its job of preventing reading failure. And if not, stay tuned, because that's what we're going to talk about in this presentation. So in addition to tier 1, we want to build a second layer, an additional intervention system for some students who are at risk in spite of having generally effective instruction, that high quality tier 1 that I just described. The purpose of tier 2 is to accelerate learning and catch students up to the grade level expectations. General parameters for this layer of intervention, something like 30 to 45 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week. Again, with research aligned, explicit and systematic instruction delivered in small groups. Could be exactly the same small groups as students had in tier 1, could be with the same program, might be more explicit, direct, systematic, and supportive. We would definitely do more frequent progress monitoring when we are giving more resources at tier 2, because we need to know if we should make a change to our instruction quickly. We don't want to leave a student in intervention that's not working for them for 3 months or something. We need frequent feedback to know if we should change instruction. And we often typically don't have to have an individual student problem-solving meeting. You know, we used to do in the old days intervention assistance teams or pre-referral team meetings, or people called them teacher-based teams, where we would gather around a student and talk about what the student needed. When you have good screening data and a 3-tiered model, when you are meeting as a grade level team to do problem solving with those data, you know from the screening data what you need for intervention at the grade level. You typically don't have to have an individual student meeting. And how do you know if your tier 2 system is effective? If it is closing the gap and getting that 15% of students to those grade level expectations. Now, tier 3 is just an intensification of what you're doing at tier 2. So only a few students should need this very, very intensive support. It is for the purpose of catching up or keeping students' skills from getting worse if they are already struggling readers. It is more time in a smaller group with more effective instruction, where everybody in that small group has the same instructional need. It might be individual instruction, but probably not. There's not really good evidence that that small group can't be just as effective as one-on-one. So I think that's pretty comforting. Flexibility here, skill-based groups, the same concepts that apply to the tier 2 system apply at tier 3. We're just doing it with more intensity, smaller groups, more opportunities to practice, longer dose of intervention, more frequent progress monitoring, so that we can make a change very quickly if we find that what we're doing isn't working. And this is the time when we're convening the individual student meetings, where we're bringing in parents and family members to plan that intensive instruction. Okay, so how do we know if Tier 1 is effective? This is the use of universal screening that I don't see happening often enough. So I think about universal screening as a fork in the road. Well, not that kind of fork, but this kind of fork. Depending on the percentage of students who are at risk when you do universal screening, that's going to tell you which path you're taking at the fork in the road. If you have 20% or more of your students who are at risk, you should go down the pathway to analyze and improve your Tier 1 instruction, because you haven't gotten it right yet. It's not well matched to the needs of your students. If you have less than 20% of your students who are at risk, then you can go down the path that would be about designing and implementing an intervention system, Tier 2 and Tier 3. So you need a universal screener that is going to give you these kind of data. Most schools are now screening for reading risk. They're doing it early. They're doing it 3 times a year. They're screening everybody. That's great. But people are limited, I think, in the way that they're using their screening data. They're identifying students who are at risk with screening, but they're not always identifying the systems that are at risk with screening. And in my experience, we can have much more impact on a larger number of students if we take the perspective of using universal screening to evaluate the effectiveness of Tier 1 instruction. So if you have more students who are at risk than are on track, then your first step is to analyze and improve what you're doing in classroom reading instruction in Tier 1. You're not going to be able to rely on an intervention system, Tier 2 or Tier 3, no matter how good it is. It's not going to be possible for you to provide intervention to correct for this problem. You're going to have to get it at the source. You're going to have to make those changes to Tier 1. So what are some of the hallmarks of effective Tier 1 instruction? If you find yourself in this situation where lots and lots of students are at risk on your screener, here are some things to consider. So I'm just going to show you the list and then we'll talk through each one. Teachers are the most important variable in the classroom, in the instructional environment. So teacher knowledge of the reading research and how to do database decision-making or problem solving, that's number one, the most important aspect. You need to make sure you at least have sufficient time scheduled in the school day. You need to make sure the way you're using that time is lined up to the research, that what you're teaching and how you're teaching is aligned with the research. And you need to make sure that you are grouping students according to their skill needs, according to screening and other data, and that you are using your adult resources flexibly. One of the reasons the MTSS model was originally conceptualized is to bring together all of the services that might support a student, primarily to bring together general education and special education into one united system that can meet the needs of all students. So that's the piece that I'm going to share with you that I'm calling flexible service delivery. Okay, should I pause and see if there are any questions, or Jeannie, are you going to jump in if there's anything that's in the chat as a burning?
We don't have any questions in the chat, so feel free to put questions in the chat if you have them. I guess I'm wondering, Stephanie, we are talking about foundational reading skills, right? Kindergarten, first, second grade, being able target those foundational skills using some kind of diagnostic screener, right? After the universal. Am I thinking what you're thinking?
So universal screening definitely on all of the essential skills: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency in text, reading comprehension. We should be screening across the board on those skills. If after screening you still have questions about what to teach next for a student, you should follow up with a diagnostic assessment. So for example, second grade and above, you're screening on reading comprehension, let's say with oral reading fluency, a good direct universal screening tool. And if you have a student in second grade and above who is an accurate reader, but not, they're an accurate and fluent reader, but not demonstrating reading comprehension, that's a good scenario in which to do a diagnostic on comprehension. Or if you have a student who is not an accurate reader, then you're going to need a decoding diagnostic to tease out which patterns does the student know and not know. So diagnostic assessment is not necessarily for everybody all the time. It should be very focused. You should tie your diagnostic assessment to a question that you have about students.
And then are we kind of talking about a walk to read model here where, where it got all hands on deck and we have a group that is at this certain skill and we have another group that's at this skill. Now, granted, not every kid's going to be at the same spot, but generally speaking,
Yep.
we might have 5 groups, but a teacher can't do it. So we're getting all the teachers all hands on deck and doing this walk to read model.
Yes,
okay,
exactly. So doing what people typically talk about as walk to read. Some people call it what I need time or win time, or they'll name it after their school mascot, Tiger Time or something like that. When people often conceptualize that approach of skill-based small groups with all hands on deck, all adults in the system working with a small group, they often conceptualize that as intervention. They often will implement that as tier 2. And what I'm suggesting is if you are in a scenario like this example that I was showing, where more students are at risk than not at risk, you might consider differentiating your first reading instruction in tier 1 and implementing that idea, like we might call walk to read, as differentiating your tier 1 instruction so that students will get a small group targeted at their skill needs in tier 1, and they'll get another dose of it at tier 2. In my experience, this is what accelerates learning. This is how we close the gap. This is what that 3-tiered model is designed for. This is why it's shaped like a triangle, because we're layering on those instructional opportunities. Every student needs to get to the grade level expectations, but what it will take to get them there is not the same amount or kind of instruction. So we've got to have additional opportunities that we can layer on, but what we're layering onto has to be lined up to the needs of the students. We can't just teach whole group all the time in tier 1 if we have a situation like this, because that's not going to be matched to what students need. We've got to differentiate tier 1 when we find ourselves with screening data that look like these.
And I think also, Stephanie, there's a misconception, like I have to have a different resource or intervention tool for tier 2. That's a bit of a misconception. Really, what you're doing is you're just giving them more time to work on that skill that they're at. Is really what's happening. So rather than 30 minutes, they're getting 60 minutes.
Yes, good point, because this is a common misunderstanding that we need a tier 1 program, a tier 2 program, and a different tier 3 program. And oh my gosh, nothing is more confusing for an at-risk student than having 3 different scope and sequences, 3 different sets of terminology, perhaps 3 different instructors at 3 different times of the day. No, we can use the same instruction. We can intensify, as you're describing, by increasing time or reducing group size and so on.
We have a couple of questions that people have put in the chat that are specific to screening and diagnostic testing. So Linda is asking, what's the most effective way to screen reading comprehension? And Kevin is asking, what diagnostic surveys do you recommend? Does CORE have a comprehension diagnostic survey, or do you recommend using a survey from your Tier 1 curriculum?
Okay, so the best screening, the first question was about good screening of reading comprehension, oral reading fluency. Oral reading fluency, words correct, is a powerful universal screening tool. And you get the added bonus of also being able to use it for progress monitoring. Oral reading fluency, words correct, is highly correlated with reading comprehension. It is a very good and reliable indicator of reading comprehension, and it's an excellent predictor of reading comprehension. It's reliable and valid. It's instructionally relevant. It doesn't take a lot of time. You can use it for individual student decisions and for these aggregate decisions, like I'm talking about evaluating the effectiveness of your tiered model. So oral reading fluency is what I would recommend for screening. The second question related to diagnostic assessments, there are a variety of tools for decoding. So the word recognition diagnostic piece, you can use a spelling inventory. You can use a diagnostic decoding inventory or survey. CORE makes one that they make available.
CORE is a free one. Mm-hmm.
At no charge. Really Great Reading has one also at no charge. There are really good decoding diagnostic assessments from 95% group. Theirs is called the PSI. I like that, especially because it links to their phonics lesson library. So you've got that assessment and instruction connection right built in. And I also like the decoding diagnostic from Acadience Reading. The diagnostic from Acadience for language comprehension is called CFOL, C-F-O-L, stands for Comprehension, Fluency, and Oral Language. And that one is not free, but it's very powerful. And I don't know of other tools that are like it for those language comprehension skills. So those would be ones I would recommend that people check out.
All right. I think we got our questions in the chat, but that was good. So we'll still clear things up here as we go, because I'm sure it's
good.
muddy.
Thank you.
Some.
Thanks for that. And we'll have time at the end for additional questions, but jump in if there's something that comes up between now and then. Okay, so the sort of 4 concepts that I'm suggesting that you consider investigating when you find yourself in the situation where more than 20% of your students are at risk. How could we improve the effectiveness of our classroom reading instruction? Well, teacher knowledge is number one. This is your number one approach and strategy, is to increase what your teachers know about reading and how to teach it. I have a picture of a refrigerator here because I wanted to make a connection around knowledge that when my refrigerator stopped working recently, my bank of knowledge about what could possibly have caused it to stop working was very, very small. I had very few pieces of information at my disposal to determine why was my refrigerator not working anymore. Like, is it plugged in? Like, beyond that, I don't know where to go. So we need to equip teachers when they are faced with a student who scores low on universal screening or a student who's a struggling reader in their classroom. We need teachers to automatically know what are the capacities that students need to have in place to understand what they're reading. They need to know that simple view, word recognition and language comprehension. What are the skills underneath in the simple view that might contribute to a reading comprehension problem? They've got to know the 5 essential skill areas. We need teachers to be equipped with knowledge about what are the best research-based approaches to teaching those 5 essential skills. And we need teachers to be knowledgeable about the system level factors that support and the barriers that could get in the way of students becoming readers. So we need teachers to have knowledge and skills in at least these areas so that they can deliver effective Tier 1 instruction. Teaching reading is rocket science, the title of Louisa Moat's famous paper. We need to support teachers in every way we possibly can so that they can do that very skillful art of bringing knowledge from the research to their work with individual students who are in front of them. This is not the job for a novice. This is not something we should take for granted or take lightly. We've got to invest in teacher knowledge. Second thing to consider is your schedule. So when you find yourself perhaps with more students at risk than not at risk, or more than 20% of your students at risk, make sure first that you have enough time built into the schedule. Allotted time. How much is protected in your school day for classroom reading instruction at Tier 1? And how much time you need is going to be determined by your screening data. This might vary at different grade levels. It could vary across schools. This is a decision you make based on the needs of your students. One thing you might consider is that in order to provide flexible service delivery, all hands on deck supporting Tier 1 differentiation, maybe everybody can't teach reading in the morning. So let me give you an example of how that might play out. This is an example of a schedule showing K-3. Don't get bogged down in the details. It's a conceptual kind of representation where this column is kindergarten's schedule. Here is the small group portion of their Tier 1 instruction early in the day, and later in the day is the small group Tier 2, what they called what I need time or win time. Now, Tier 2 is not designed to be given to everyone. So the point of the 3-tiered model is shrink risk through the first way you teach reading. So only about 20% need the extra dose at Tier 2. This school was not there yet. They were providing intervention to every student. So this is really burdensome and difficult, but they were using that as a short-term approach. What I need time was their Tier 2 intervention. Now you can see in the first grade column that the small group part of Tier 1 was at a different time of day. So the adults in this school could shift from supporting kindergarten Tier 1 to first grade Tier 1. You can see second grade, their Tier 1 small group happened here. Their Tier 2 was actually the very first thing they did each day. And then here is third grade's small group differentiation of core instruction. This is just an illustration to show you how it could possibly play out. Everybody can't teach reading in the morning, but you can use your resources flexibly to meet the needs of your students. And this is a way of illustrating the 2 doses of small group instruction. Small group is not just for Tier 2. If you have a lot of students who are at risk, it makes sense to customize your Tier 1 by using small group there as well. Now, people often ask, what should we be teaching in small group? Which skills should we be teaching in small group? This depends on your screening data. So this is just an illustration of beginning of year screening in the far left column, middle of year screening in the middle column. The green and blue represents students who are not at risk on screening. The red and yellow represents students who are at risk. So you can see that even through the first half of this school year, not a lot of growth happened. There was some improvement, some reduction of risk, but not enough. So this is a scenario where the context is that most students are struggling with the word recognition skills. They have gaps in their understanding of those phonemic awareness, phonics, decoding, and spelling skills. And if that's the case, this would be something to consider in terms of differentiating your tier 1 instruction, making sure that you are working equally and urgently on word recognition and language comprehension, the two capacities in the simple view of reading, but you're doing it in different approaches and perhaps in different group sizes. So you might be, like is the case with this particular school, teaching the language comprehension skills in whole group during your 90 minutes of tier 1 instruction, and then teaching the word recognition skills in small teacher-led groups during the 90 minutes of tier 1 instruction. Just a way of thinking about it. Don't get lost in the details here. Just to illustrate the idea that you should be using your universal screening data to make these decisions. How it plays out will vary across schools and even across grade levels within schools. Now, perhaps more important even than having the schedule arranged in a way that matches your student needs, what you're doing during tier 1 is just as, if not more important. So making sure that your tier 1 instruction is explicit, systematic, cumulative, and focused on those essential skills. Why? Because we only have one shot at it, and getting it wrong is devastating for students and their families. When we have these high stakes skills, we should be teaching directly, not leaving it to chance. When the skills are new or difficult, we should be teaching them directly and explicitly. When there's one right answer, right? When it's not something that we need students to discover, that we can just directly teach it to them, that's the way that we should do it. And in fact, in the research, all the evidence points to teaching reading explicitly and systematically. All of the reading and writing skills. The balance is in terms of doing that instruction explicitly. So what we're teaching, what that instruction looks like, I've got a couple of illustrations here, one in the word recognition category, one in the language comprehension category, but you're going to see these kinds of elements of good structured literacy lesson plans where you're targeting specific key skills that are broken down into manageable chunks and taught step by step, when there's direct, supportive, and carefully selected examples. Some people don't like scripted programs, but I got to tell you, I would much rather have well-selected examples and language in front of me so that I can focus on the needs of the children and not have to be thinking of what's another good word that has the short I in it. I want my attention focused on the children, making sure that we're providing immediate corrective feedback. We're front loading it so that we minimize the possibility of mistakes. But if there's a mistake, we're right there to correct it. That we're providing distributed and cumulative practice across time so that we move students from accuracy to mastery and automaticity. And that we do this with minimal but direct language from the teacher and active student participation and engagement. Direct and explicit instruction leaves nothing to chance. That is the point. So here are two illustrations. This is a sort of standard structured literacy lesson plan that integrates phonemic awareness, so that from top to bottom, phonemic awareness linked to letters, so phonemes linked to graphemes, students reading and spelling words with the new pattern that you're teaching, practicing those words in isolation and then in the context of connected text, and perhaps even rounding it all out with asking a question after reading the decodable text. This is kind of a standard format. Don't get bogged down with the minute guidelines here, but this takes what we know in the reading research and puts it into a lesson framework that will maximize those language structures, integrate across language structures, and allow you to move your students systematically forward in the word recognition category of skills. And then here's an illustration of an explicit vocabulary routine, just so that we also round out the language comprehension realm or capacities, that it's not just the decoding and encoding skills that we're teaching explicitly. This applies to the language comprehension skills as well. So I'm showing kind of a beginning to end kind of sequence here. And then in red, I'm trying to highlight where the language structures come into play so that you are taking advantage of the interaction among the various layers of language. Your focus is on teaching the meaning of new words, but you're accelerating the growth in vocabulary by bringing in orthography, morphology, and so on. Okay, so last component to consider if you are in the position of needing to improve the effectiveness of your Tier 1 instruction is the idea of grouping and flexible service delivery. So this is an illustration from Sharon Dunn's school when she was a principal in California. This is her first grade team where she hired paraprofessionals to support her classroom teachers, 4 first grade teachers, and she hired additional staff, 6 paraprofessionals for half day so that they could support the differentiation of Tier 1 in the morning, in this case, 106 students. And based on the screening and diagnostic data, they sorted out into something like these 4 categories, where students in the top left of my slide are the ones who are most struggling. So they all have roughly, as close as possible, the same need for what they need to learn next. So they would sort of land at the same place on the phonics scope and sequence. And she trained teachers and paraprofessionals in a research-aligned intervention program. There were 4 adults, 2 teachers, and 2 paras who divided up these 18 students. So smallest group with well-trained adults. That's kind of the concept to think about for your most struggling students. And then you can see how it played out with the other groups. And down here in the right-hand corner, bottom right corner, are the students who are most advanced, if you will, among these first graders. There were 33 of them who were working with 1 teacher. So the idea of grouping that's based on skill, getting students together who have the same instructional need, smallest groups for the students who are most struggling, that gives them the maximal number of opportunities to practice and respond, and making sure that everybody who's delivering this good, high quality intervention program has had training in it about how to deliver the program, but also training in the background knowledge about why the program is structured the way it is and how to observe what the student is doing, look at their assessment data, and make adjustments to the program as needed. Okay, so some summary thoughts, and then we can open it up for questions. Tier 1 is an opportunity for risk reduction. I hope I have sparked some thinking in this direction for you to not expect your intervention system to carry all of the load, that you start thinking about the first way you teach reading as an opportunity to shrink the number of students who need something more. Your intervention system cannot be effective. It can't do its job if too many students need intervention. You end up diluting whatever intervention resource you have to be so thin that it can't actually do its job, which is accelerate learning and catch kids up. Intervention is most effective when it is in addition to, not instead of, effective classroom reading instruction. You can use your screening data to identify how your tier 1 should be designed. And it's that problem solving process done in teams that helps you make those decisions. If you're sitting here listening and thinking, yeah, that all sounds great, but in my school, blah, blah, blah. Whatever the blah, blah, blahs are, and I've listed some here that I hear commonly, we don't have enough time, we don't know enough, we don't have good materials, our administrator's not supportive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are not complaints. These are the barriers that are the reality in your system. These are exactly the issues that you should lift up for very direct problem solving. Those are the barriers that it's the leader's job or the leadership team's job to eliminate. You've got to identify what those barriers are so that you can remove them and get to better, more effective classroom reading instruction. A couple of resources for you, where to get that defining guide from the Reading League. I always go back to Joe Torgeson's foundational article from the 90s, Catch Them Before They Fall. It sets the stage for prevention and why we focus there. 2 states that you could check out if you want to know more about multi-tiered systems of support. I did a presentation for the Pennsylvania Patent Technical Assistance Center a couple of years back. It's still on their YouTube channel. I have some free resources on my website. Jeannie mentioned my membership earlier, and I have an MTSS course that you could check out as well. So here's all my contact information, how you can stay in touch with me, track me down if you have questions after today. And I think I've left some time for questions now. So let us
so if people want
know what's out there in the chat.
Yeah, people want to unmute and ask questions. I've been putting all kinds of stuff in the chat, Stephanie, resources, screening tools, lesson plan frameworks. So
awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, feel free to unmic and ask questions.
The Reading League Wisconsin is a wealth of resources and information. You're like a conduit to getting good info out in the world. So thanks for adding those to the chat. I can stop sharing and we can just have people unmute if they have a question they want to ask.
Got lots of people here. I'm sure you're teeming with questions.
Hi, Stephanie. I have a quick question for you.
Good.
For kindergarten, first grade, universal screening data, FastBridge assesses RAM, sight words, nonsense words, phoning, segmenting, and ORF. What would you recommend that I could give teachers, as these are the sub-skills that are most important, and these are how you can use the data when planning tier 1?
So are you looking for a suggestion about a sequence among those screeners?
Yeah, just anything that I can help the first and kindergarten teachers out with after they look at their data and next steps.
So I would think about the sequence that we need to move students through to get to reading comprehension. And that starts with phonemic awareness. So I would prioritize that at the beginning of kindergarten. Your FastBridge indicator of being able to work with sounds in spoken language, beginning of first grade too. And then from there, I would look for, so let me say it this way, anybody who is struggling with phonemic awareness, they are a priority because that's such a key indicator of risk. It's such a key contributor to reading success. So that's where I would start. And then from there, I'd look at your word level reading indicators. So you said you've got a sight word screening.
Yep, sight words and nonsense.
Yep, so sight words and nonsense, good. That's good companions there. That's what I would look at next. And those are measuring 2 different types of words, right? So, and I don't know on FastBridge if sight word means high frequency or if it means a regular high frequency word. So some of those are going to be regular and decodable. So that's one piece of information. And the nonsense word reading is going to tap into that alphabetic principle that letter sound relationship and the ability to blend letter sounds. So I would elevate those next, and I'd be looking for patterns, right? Like if a student is low on both the indicator of phonemic awareness and the non-word reading, that student is going to go to the top of my list. And what am I going to work on? I'm going to use that sort of lesson format that I showed that integrates phonemic awareness with letter sound, word reading, spelling, decodable text. That lesson framework is what I would be prioritizing and using with those students. If it's kindergarten, it's going to be, this is A, it represents A, and you form it like this. This is T, it represents T, you write it like this. And I'm going to read the word by blending the sounds together, at. And now I'm going to write the word A-T, at. Right? Like it can be very basic, but it still follows that same lesson format.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Stephanie, you might have mentioned this and I missed it, but so with the walk to read and win time, I've never done that before in a school. So I'm under the impression that teachers are flooding, so there's no independent centers. Is that, or rotations, things like that for kids?
It depends.
Okay.
It depends. There's no prohibition against that. It depends on the needs of your students. It depends on how many adults that you have. So you may have, adults as centers, if you want to think about that, and the kids are rotating. And it's possible that one of the things that they rotate to is some kind of partner work or independent work. So is that what you were asking about?
Thank you. I know teachers are always looking for like more effective practices with independent work because they do a lot of small group rotations with them. But I was wondering, since I'd never done the walk to read or the win time, if that included those still. So thank you.
It can. Yeah, it definitely can. And my suggestion, just to throw this out there, for the things that students are going to do independently for homework, or if you want to think about it as literacy stations or centers or just, independent work time, that can be a very productive time of the day if what you're asking them to do is something that they are already accurate at, and that practice is directed at moving them to automaticity.
Okay.
So this means that your centers probably have to be differentiated as well.
Mm-hmm.
Your homework may need to be differentiated. Don't ask students to do anything on their own that they're still in the stage of acquiring, because nobody's going to be there to give them corrective feedback. And if they practice mistakes, then you're going to be undoing that forevermore, right? So think very intentionally about only assigning for independent work or homework something that you have seen the child do accurately. And then you're using that independent work as practice to go from accuracy to automaticity.
I just want to add on, Stephanie, in my experience with schools that I've worked in, that the walk to read time, every kid is in it with a teacher in a small group.
That's ideal.
When they're doing the win time, every kid is with a teacher in a small group. So we're using paras. So whether they need acceleration, they're getting acceleration. If they're on grade level, they're getting more grade level practice. If they're below grade level, they're getting more practice of the skill they just worked on during the walk to read model.
Yep.
So there's not a lot of time spent on your own time per se.
Yep. That's ideal. Mm-hmm. And engaging special educators to be part of that squad, paraprofessionals, speech pathologist, EL staff, librarian. I mean, you name it, I've seen it. Lunch lady, principal, librarian. Did I already say librarian? Bus drivers I saw in one district in Iowa, actually, Amy. So yeah, anybody who's on contract, who you can train to deliver intervention, think about it. Think about engaging them to be part of that reading solution.
Hi, Stephanie. It's so good to see you again. This is Tracy
You
Ferris.
too.
Okay, so I love all of this. And I'm just thinking, my biggest thing about all of this is the idea that we let our data drive our instructional decisions, even in tier 1, which is somewhat of a huge shift for people, because they've thought of, I'm teaching my, second grade skills in tier 1, and I'm going to intervene all of the skills that maybe are the at-risk skills. So I love the idea of not letting that be how we lead our decision making. What advice do you have for teachers that are, hoping to eventually get to the walk to read stage, but right now we don't have that system set up? What is the best advice you could give a teacher who's wanting to look at, here's my data, and then make some good decisions about tier 1 and skill-based grouping, but I really maybe just have me and my team to lean on for now? Is there some advice for now, maybe?
So across the grade level, I think you can do some grouping, right? Just let's say there are 3 of you as first grade teachers. You can lay out the needs of your students, all of your first graders, literally lay them out on the table. What does everybody need? Group them in the most logical ways, and then decide among the 3 of you who's going to work with which group. And you might have the smallest group still be the students who are most struggling, and the largest group being the students who are on track. But divide up among the 3 of you who's going to work with whom. So that's a way at least to get started. At the very least, I think, even if you aren't in a situation where you've got that much collaboration among your teammates at the grade level, knowing what your students need from screening data and letting that inform your work in the classroom, even if for some reason, you're mandated to teach all whole group, right? At least knowing, okay, this student right here is one who's still learning to read CVC words while I'm teaching my second grade core program that's focusing on vowel teams. Okay, so what do I have to do to scaffold for this student? Or what kind of additional practice am I going to give that student? Or when am I going to ask for a verbal response versus a written response? Or when am I going to have him listen to it on audio or from me reading it versus asking him to read it himself? Those are the kinds of database decisions I think we can make as a baseline when we understand our screening data and apply it to what we're doing in classroom reading instruction.
I was going to ask a question, Stephanie, what if a district has bought a core program and they have a core phonics program for a whole group? What has been your experience with teachers who want to do a walk to read, but yet they have the core program?
So again, it depends on your screening data. If you are looking at screening data and everybody's kind of at the same place at the beginning of the year with their phonics skills, whole group is what you should do. You should do whole group phonics instruction. But if everybody's all over the board, then you might think about, across the 3 teachers, maybe you're starting at different places in that core program. Or maybe you're using your intervention systems, tier 2 specifically, to pre-teach or reteach the skills that are going to happen in whole group. I think that's the best you can do if you're in that situation. I think that's what you have to do, because otherwise you are spending time, precious instructional minutes, on something that you know is not a fit for the student. You're either boring them with something that they already know, or you are frustrating them with something that's 10 steps down the line from where they are. And neither place is a good place to be. So Those would be my suggestions.
Thank you. We are at 7:03, so you've given an hour of your precious time to all of us tonight. Thank you so much, Stephanie. They can reach out to you. I put the Academy in the chat. If people want to reach out to you, that they can reach out to you directly there. But Wisconsin Reading League, we're here to serve you as well. So reach out to us if you have any questions. And thank you, everyone, for being here tonight.
Thanks, everybody, giving up your time at the end of a long work day. I appreciate you being here. And thanks again, Jeannie and Mary, for hosting. Have a good night.